Hello and welcome to Upgrade Thought. Today I will be talking with Taylor Stadden, a certified mental performance consultant. Taylor works with athletes of all levels, helping them improve their minds in the service of elite performance. Taylor is the founder of Upper Mentality, a company that he started in 2019, which provides these services to athletes. In this conversation, we discuss what mental performance is, how youth sports can start to feel like a job, how athletes and others can cultivate a growth mindset, athletes' misconceptions about mindset, what healing imagery is, mindfulness, client, consultant, relationships, and more. Enjoy the show.
All right, Taylor, welcome.
Cooper, it's an absolute pleasure. How are you today?
I'm good, man. Like I was saying before, I'm tired from school. It was a long couple months, but glad to be back home.
What are you taking right now?
So I'm thinking about majoring in psychology. So
Oh, okay.
this semester I took an intro to psych course, which was
Cool.
that was pretty challenging. I also
Mhm.
took a couple of philosophy classes and a economics class. So,
Okay.
but yeah.
Awesome. Right on. Cool. Yeah. Make sure you give yourself some time to recharge and get ready for the next semester. So,
Yeah, for sure, man. Anyway, so let's jump into these questions. So, firstly, what is mental performance? What does it look like?
yeah. So, mental performance is one of those things where when I get asked, like, what does it look like? It's a little more tricky just because it's not like strength and conditioning where you can, you see your muscles grow or anything like that. So, mental performance is really about training the 6 inches between your ears. So when you think about like strength and conditioning coaches, really what mental performance coaches do or mental performance consultants is they help train those 6 inches between the ears. And so really what it looks like is it's really just to me boils down to helping athletes be able to perform when it matters most. So when you're talking about more of a high performance context, but then it can also be geared towards other things. So like athlete enjoyment, positive relationships, etc.
Got you. Quick follow up. So, when I was playing basketball, I didn't, just for some context, I
Mhm.
sort of come from the basketball world. Um, I felt like as I got older, it really started to feel like a job.
Mm,
And I really, because you mentioned athlete enjoyment, so I just wanted to bring this up.
right. Yeah, of
Is
course.
there a way that people can train like that sort of, I don't even know if I want to call it a skill, but just like the attitude of just enjoying it for the sake of enjoying it? Or is it kind of something that inevitably happens as you get more serious about the sport? It just sort of starts to feel like a job for everyone. Because I know a lot of athletes who kind of go through this
Mhm.
problem.
Right. Right. Okay. Well, let me ask you then, Cooper. Like, what made you first want to play basketball?
Uh, I mean, it was a variety of things, but I mean, I can't even explain it, to be honest. It was just like
Mhm.
an innate love for the game. I mean, there are a lot of, there weren't, I mean, there haven't been many things in life that I just feel like I should be doing, and I can't even
Mhm.
explain it. But basketball
Right.
was one of those things. It was just like,
Mhm.
I just like this. I don't know what it is, but it's just great. I like it.
Yeah. You did. You're right. You did it because you love it, right? Like, no one would have to give you any additional push or motivation. Like, you did it because you genuinely wanted to play and you wanted to be there, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so there's this story. I'm not sure where it comes from, and I might butcher it a bit, so bear with me. But there's a story about how there were these kids playing soccer, and whenever they would play there, it was kind of loud and it was disturbing. And so there was this neighbor whose yard backed onto the soccer field, and this neighbor was trying to figure out ways to get these kids to stop being so loud. Right, the neighbor did not want these kids playing soccer near his house. And so what the neighbor did was he said to them, "Okay, here, I'm going to give all of you $5 each if you play soccer here tomorrow." Right. And they're like, "Oh, great, great. We're getting paid to play soccer." Right. And then the next day, so they come the next day, he gives them all $5 and they play. It's great. Now, the next day they come and he's like, "Oh, you know what? I'm actually going to give you all $1 today to play soccer." And they're like, "Whoa, like, why would we want to do that? We just got paid $5 yesterday. Why would we do it for $1 today?" And then eventually the kids just stopped coming. And so that example kind of speaks to the idea of how the moment we start to bring external things into something we love, it can kind of hurt the innate love of what we want to do. And so
Mm,
like as you move up in levels, right? Um, obviously there's different external motivators that are going to be present, right? So let's say you're transitioning from high school to collegiate sport, right? For a lot of athletes, that means they are playing for a scholarship. Okay. And for some athletes, it means they're even showcasing themselves for the professional level or both. And so naturally, you now are going to be doing something you perhaps originally love, but you're now doing it for perhaps other reasons, opposed to just the fact that you just love it, you just enjoy it, right? And so there's that side of it. Now, um, so now when it kind of going back to your question though, of like how if you can train it, I would say really to me it kind of becomes more about being able to focus on like why you're doing what you're doing. Okay, like why is this sport important to you? Like, and kind of coming back to the roots of that, because those kind of external motivators can be very powerful in the short term, but they don't really last very long either, right? But if you can find ways to kind of bring yourself back to the true reasons why you play sport, like why it's important to you and et cetera, more kind of a values based approach, that's when you can start to have more consistent motivation. So, um, perhaps it's really just about learning to focus more on what matters, if
mm.
that answers your
So
question.
so redirecting your attention towards why you're playing it in the first place is something that athletes find helpful. I mean, does it take
Mhm.
like, because I'm sort of imagining myself doing that. Like, I feel like the first, if I were to have said that to myself once, I probably wouldn't have had that big of an effect. But if I,
Right.
on a daily basis reminded myself I'm doing this, the reason I started was because I just felt like I should be here, then it
Mhm.
probably starts to have more of an effect when it's repeated questioning of your why, right?
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, and, for sure, and but I guess the other side of the coin here too is when you think about, okay, like this is my why, this is why I originally did it. Now, those motivators and those reasons can also change over time, right? Kind of shifting from maybe when you're really young, it's like, okay, this is a very internal source of motivation. I do it because I love it. I do it because I want to get better. And then as you get older, maybe it's like, hey, I'm doing this now because I want a scholarship. I'm doing this because I want to make a lot of money, or I'm doing this to impress others, or whatever it might be, right? And so, those motivators can obviously really change. Um, and I even saw this interview where I believe it was someone asked Lou Williams, basketball player. I'm sure you know him.
Mm.
About like if he feels like the Harlem Globetrotters would be good NBA players, and he just like laughed. He said, the difference between us and the Harlem Globetrotters is like we play basketball when we don't feel like playing basketball,
Mm.
right? Like it's a job for us. We need to get up, and we really prefer to do like anything else. Essentially, is what I was taking away from you saying. And so again, like that speaks to like maybe some things you love are not also meant to be your career, right?
Mm. So, would you say that there are instances in which you can't really foster a love for the sport, or is there like would you always try to find that in with your athletes? Like, are there times where you just come to the conclusion that it's the reality is that they're doing it for money, like it is their job, and it's might not be too fun at times?
Um, I'm not sure. Like, I mean, I don't know if I've ever perhaps come to that conclusion with an athlete before, but I do think that it's important to realize that like when you're like the moment you start to tie whatever you're doing to something external, there's going to be times where it's not going to be fun. It's not always going to be enjoyable, and that's normal, and that's okay.
Okay.
Right? Like for example, like I love running my business, but there's parts of running a business that are not the most fun thing in the world, like accounting, bookkeeping, marketing, like not exactly my favorite things in the world to do, but to me, I also remind myself like those are things I need to do in order to be able to do the other things that I aspire to do. And that to me
Mm.
that motivates me, that keeps me going, right?
Mm. Okay,
Yeah.
I see. So what do you think the biggest misconceptions are about mindset? What do people get wrong?
Ooh. How much time do you have? Good question. I don't know if there's necessarily like one biggest misconception, but what I will say is, mm, I think one thing that holds a lot of athletes back is they rely on how they feel, and they rely on, whether it be confidence or excitement or motivation. Like, they really rely on those things in order to have them perform and have them show up. And I think that can be a very tricky kind of path to go down. And I say that just because, like, feeling confident is, for a lot of athletes, is helpful, right? Feeling good is helpful. Now the thing is like, our confidence and how we feel are naturally going to fluctuate because we're human, and like, we go through things, and you know so those things are not very stable, right? And so if we're tying our performance to something very unstable, we're going to have very unstable performance trends, right? Versus if we can tie our mental performance to things more that we can't control, or we have more control over, rather, then that's when we can start to perform better. So I do think that how you feel is heavily overrated um, and with mental performance. Like, a lot of athletes say, oh, like, you just got to feel confident. You just got to focus, you just got to, whatever it might be. It's like, well, if all you had to do is tell yourself that you just have to focus and feel confident, then you never have any confidence or focus issues. Right. But again, like, those things are not very sustainable. Right. Well, what are your thoughts on that,
Mm.
Cooper?
Oh man, I mean, I struggled. I'd say basically what got me interested in sports psychology was, I mean, as a basketball player, I struggled with this a lot. Like, I'd kind of tense up before games, and I wouldn't be the
Mm.
same player, once the game started that I was in practice. And for years, people were telling me, "Oh, like, don't be so nervous, be more confident." And I thought, and this is what the whole basketball community, well, not the whole, but a lot of a really like big part of the basketball community will kind of tell you, like, you have to play with more confidence. Like, and then, people try to talk you out of being anxious. And eventually I just came to the conclusion, like, okay, I'm watching these NBA players. Uh,
Yeah.
They're definitely nervous before they play in front of thousands of people at the games and then millions of
Mhm.
more back home, but they're still playing really well. So do I really need to, like, psych myself out of being nervous, or can I just, like, maybe a better approach would be to say, okay, I'm nervous, so I can still
Mhm.
play. Like, it doesn't need to dictate my actions. So,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that sort of answers my question. I mean, one of the things that I was going to ask you is, like, what's more important, kind of optimizing your emotional state or learning to perform regardless of the emotional state? Because but I mean,
Mhm.
I guess that answers it, because that was the big
Right.
thing that I was kind of contemplating as a player. But ultimately,
Mhm.
once I just accepted that I'm gonna feel nervous or I'm gonna feel anxious before games, then I noticed that I could perform way better, because when I was trying to kind of rethink my way out of
Mhm.
nervousness, well, number one, you can't really, it becomes hard to, like, think your way out of a thinking problem. But
Yeah.
either way, like, I sort of looked at my emotions as something that I had to, like, push away, something that I had to, and that kind of derailed my focus, because I was all focused on, like,
Right.
getting
Right.
rid of these emotions. But once I just accepted that these emotions are there, like, I can feel nervous, I can feel anxious,
Mhm.
then I could focus on the game, because I didn't have this thing that I was, kind of preoccupied with. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I think like, one thing you said there to me is really interesting, and I think is really worth kind of exploring more, is like, when you first gave that example for your playing basketball, you said, like, like, I am nervous. Okay. But then as you started explaining more, you kind of shifted towards more of like, okay, I am feeling nervous. Right. So that kind of delineation is really important. It's
Mm,
understand, like, you are not nervous, you are not anxious. Okay, it's not like a you thing. It's, you are feeling nervous, you are feeling anxious, right? Because feelings are temporary. Okay, and so instead of, like you said, pushing them away, it becomes actually more helpful to just learn to accept that, yeah, like, you are going to feel some anxiety sometimes, you are going to feel nervous sometimes, and before big games, that's okay, right? Like, if you're about to play in the NBA Finals Game 7, like, yeah, everyone there's probably nervous because no one there's been there before, right? Well, for the most part, most players, it's gonna be the first time they're ever doing it, right? Something they've dreamed about their whole lives. They're gonna be nervous, and that's okay, right?
Mm.
So, but those who can recognize that those nerves are okay, and that they can even find ways to use those nerves to motivate them or drive them, then those are the ones that are ultimately probably gonna have better performances, right? So, but it's about
Mm.
accepting the fact that you are going to have these feelings and learning to instead take action on the things that you want to take action on regardless.
Yeah,
Right.
I know. I have a great story for you. So
I want
I've
to hear
talked
it.
about this. I've talked about this a couple times on this podcast, but it's all right. It's very relevant to this conversation. There's this basketball player named Kyle Guy. He played for Virginia
Okay.
back when they had their like finals run, and I remember watching I don't know. I was probably in middle school or maybe at the beginning of high school at the time. And Final Four, they're down two, gets fouled on a three. So he's
Okay.
going to the free throw line for 3 free throws, and he makes
Right.
them all. They
Wow.
win the game. Everyone's going crazy. And in the interview after the game, they're like, so what's going through your head? You're stepping up to the line, 3 free throws to go, chance to ice the game. And he was like, well, to be honest, I was terrified.
Yeah.
And it's like, you're expecting an answer like, I was confident in my work. I knew
Mm.
they were going in. Like I didn't hear the crowd, and he just comes up and he's like, I could tell you that I knew they were going in, but I was terrified. And it's like, wow, like
Yeah.
that's so right. That's like right on,
Yeah.
because and he
Mm.
was still able to hit him regardless of the fact that he was scared. So that was
Mm.
probably one of the first instances in which my mindset started to share. I guess the roots for the shift were kind of planted because I was like, wow, I
Right.
mean, these high performers are still feeling these things,
Oh yeah. Absolutely. And that's a great example. And like again, like so that speaks to the idea of how like, yeah, you're allowed to feel nervous, you're allowed to feel terrified, anxious, whatever it might be, but it's like that doesn't mean that you can't perform well. It doesn't mean you can't get it done. Right. So it's like
Mm.
again, it's like would because you said his name was Kyle Guy.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna assume that Kyle Guy would have preferred to feel confident at the line instead of terrified, right? Now, although the confidence would have been preferred, it doesn't mean he still can't get it done, right? But what happens to a lot of athletes is the moment they don't feel confident, the moment they don't, necessarily feel the most prepared, whatever it might be, is they just say, you know what, today's not my day. I'm not going to get anything done. I'm just going to, I accept that I'm going to play poorly today. And that happens to more athletes
Mm.
than you may think. So so again, it's like yes, you prefer to feel good, but it's not so much about how good you feel. It's about giving every last bit of what you do have to give that day. So if it's a 20% day, you give every last bit of that 20%. If it's an 80% day, every last bit of that 80. What a lot of athletes do is the moment they don't feel 95, 100, they're like, you know what, this is a 5% day. This is a 0% day. And then
Mm.
obviously you're not going to play consistent, right?
Interesting. So it's
Mhm.
they sort of succumb to the feelings rather than understanding
Mhm.
that those feelings can coexist with performance.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Talk about dealing with injuries. I know a fair amount of people who've gone through some pretty rough ones. What would you say to
Yeah.
someone who's looking at a long and uncertain recovery process? How do you approach something that's oftentimes so far outside of the athlete's locus of control?
Right. Do you mean like if I had a client who was going through that, like as their mental performance coach? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, if you had like a client who is like, kind of letting, I mean, I guess it's natural to let that get to you to an extent, but someone who's dealing with
Yeah.
the mental struggles of being injured and they're your client, what might you tell them?
Right. Um, well, I think first and foremost, I would look to give my client the space just to talk about their injury openly because the thing is as a mental performance consultant, you oftentimes are going to have more trust with someone than perhaps they have with anyone else in their lives or very very select people, right? So giving them the opportunity to talk about their feelings openly and oftentimes it can also become an emotional conversation when it comes to something very uncertain, like a long-term injury. Giving them that space is really important. Just, again, just to understand their feelings, ask open-ended questions, and just let them get whatever they need to get off their chest. And then once you kind of work with them towards more of, acceptance and like understand this is reality, as long as it's not clinical. If it's clinical, you have to refer them to a sports psychologist or a counselor. But once you're kind of past that stage, I guess you kind of shift more towards like, okay, like, although this situation is not what we want it to be, and again, this could be a totally separate conversation another day, but although this is not the ideal situation, what can we do to help get you on track so when you are back to performing, you're going to be closer to your best or maybe even better, right? Because there are opportunities within the injury process for athletes to get better, right? Like you think about athletes at really any level, oftentimes they're very busy people. They don't have time to work in other areas of the game. So you'll sometimes see that athletes, when they get injured, they suddenly have a lot more time on their hands, which sadly is often, can make people turn to unhealthy habits, right? Because they don't know what to do with their time. And so by helping support the athlete, helping them keep on track with goals and again, like keeping them accountable, whatever it might be, that's something that can be really helpful for them. But also with this extra time they have, that's also a good opportunity to work on the mental game, right? So there are some things you can do with like imagery and visualization to help athletes keep their skills sharp. So when they get back to performing, there's not as much lag from not doing the motor skill. Or you can do healing imagery to help them imagine, healing waves going to the injured parts of the body, and whatever it might be, right? So although the injury itself can be a setback, oftentimes there can be many opportunities for athletes during that process. But it's the role of the MPC in that case, in my opinion, would be helping support them to keep them on track with goals and really giving them different ways to find ways to get better, really.
Yeah. So a couple things. Hold on. Let me, just before
You're
I
good.
forget, write this down. So one of the things that you mentioned, this is kind of a reckless sidetrack, but I'm
You're
very
good.
curious to hear.
Of course.
One of the things that you mentioned is just letting your guys talk,
Yeah.
which to me seems super effective because, well, I guess I'll sort of phrase this as a question. Do you notice that in the talking, the problem sometimes solves itself, or do you feel like you have to pitch in and give advice? Like, do you ever find that just through asking a lot of questions, the client that you're talking to all of a sudden is just like, wait, maybe I should do this, or do
All
you
the
have to
time.
kind of, yeah? Can you speak about that? I'd love to hear what your
Yeah, of
experiences are with
course.
that.
Yeah, happens a lot. And I think that's one thing that is a really valuable skill for mental performance consultants to have, is being effective at asking questions, and using them to help athletes, come to their own conclusions too. Because when you think about athletes, or people in general, wanting to take ownership over their development and ownership over their problems, well, if they hear themselves say it and it's their idea, then they're going to be more likely to adhere to that too, opposed to if I just told an athlete what to do for a half hour session, they might not get a whole lot out of that. And so a
Mhm.
lot of the job of an NPC is to be a good listener and to just really just help guide athletes through this thinking process. But yeah, Cooper, all the time, athletes, they do come to their own conclusions, and I think that's a signal that you're probably doing a good job as an NPC, is if
Mm.
athletes are coming to their own conclusions and in a very autonomy supportive way.
Got you. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
And then
welcome.
the other thing was you mentioned healing imagery. We
Yeah,
don't need to go too in depth, but I've never heard of healing imagery. Can you
yeah.
educate me on this a little bit?
Of course. Yeah. And so I first learned about healing imagery with through Saul Miller's book Hockey Tough, and he talks about how I believe different colors are associated with like different feelings. So, for example, like the color blue is more associated with like cooling and everything. So, if let's say an athlete's experiencing a lot of pain, then you can help them visualize like a nice blue cooling energy kind of going through those areas to help alleviate some of that pain and bring more comfort. Which I also believe there's research that supports the fact that healing imagery can also help with the rehabilitation process. Like athletes tend to come back from injury quicker. Um, so yeah, I mean that's kind of a little bit of it in a nutshell. But yeah, just essentially like different colors are associated with different whether heating or cooling or feelings, and you can use that to help athletes, you know, in that recovery process. But worth
Hmm.
noting, if you're ever doing healing imagery and it feels painful, then to stop doing it right away.
Got you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Um,
you're welcome.
so one of the most insightful books that I've ever read is Mindset by Carol Dweck.
Mhm.
Obviously, for those who don't know, this author coined, I guess, introduced the term growth mindset. Uh,
Mhm.
in failures and opportunities and successes and whatnot in a growth minded way. Do people kind of have a predisposition to
Right.
I don't know, maybe get upset and view it as a negative reflection of their self-worth when they mess up? How do you get people to, view things in a growth-minded way? Because this is something that I've like really struggled with,
Mhm.
especially recently. Like not maybe, for example, not doing so well on a test or like,
Right.
having any sort of failure. Like uh, it's hard for me to just take the learning experience from it and not really view it as a negative reflection of my self-worth. So how
Yeah.
do you sort of sort out this challenge?
Mhm. Hmm. Yeah. So I mean, hmm. If you really think about it, if you think of the idea of progress for athletes, right? And there's this graphic from I believe the Instagram account name is Liz and Molly, and they had this graphic where it was what people think progress looks like versus what progress actually looks like. And the left line was this like straight line, right? And the right line, which was what progress actually looks like, was this very crazy, squiggly, twisty, turny line. And I think that is something that athletes need to understand when it comes to having a growth mindset is like if you want to do anything amazing and challenging and worthwhile in life, like you're gonna have ups and downs and that's okay, right? If you were to take any athlete you can even think of, I guarantee you that they've had to go through some sort of adversity in their careers, right? Like let's take Connor McDavid, for example, widely regarded as the best hockey player in the world. He broke his collarbone in his rookie season, right? So there's an example. There's a down. Other examples of downs could be, going through scoring slumps, getting cut from teams, not having much playing time, or going undrafted or whatever it might be. But time and time again, you see players still find a way to perform and move on despite these challenges. Whereas for other players, they succumb to these challenges and then they don't find a way to move on. And so when it comes to having a growth mindset, part of it also is like, and helping athletes understand growth mindset, it's like you should have challenges, you should have ups and downs, and that's totally okay. But it's not so much the fact that you're having ups and downs, but how are you going to use these as, growth opportunities, right? How are you going to help use these to motivate you and help you learn and become more mentally tough, opposed to letting them just tear you down and dictate, how you're going to feel and what you're going to do. And so, like, I guess Cooper, like, you mentioned you're a basketball guy. Like, when you think of an NBA player, for example, are there any NBA players that come to mind where they've had to really overcome a lot of challenges to reach their potential and get to where they want to be?
I mean, basically all of them. I mean,
Yeah.
uh, who comes to mind? I mean, I think Jalen Brunson, who's playing extremely well right now, had some shoulder problems a couple of
Mhm.
years ago, and I'm pretty sure
I don't want to get this wrong, but I'm pretty sure he was out for like a couple months, maybe a season
Mhm.
with a shoulder injury. So
Yeah.
I mean, we can start there because he's New York's finest right now.
Imagine if Jalen Brunson would have given up the moment things got really hard, right? He would have
Mm,
never reached his potential. So for a lot of athletes, they need to understand if you want to reach potential, you have to find ways to persevere through hard things. And experiencing those hard things is also a sign that you're challenging yourself and that you might just be in the right spot.
mm, I see. So
Yeah.
viewing the challenge as something that should be happening because all the guys who've accomplished a lot had to go through similar challenges. So if I mean,
Hmm.
I guess sometimes I like to think about it as well, if you didn't have any challenges, then what would be the point? Like, are we
Yeah.
here to do something easy? Like, what's the fun in that? You know?
Yeah, or I even saw a frame recently, and I can't take credit for this. I can't remember where I heard it, but it was like if you were if you were training someone to make it to the NBA, would you give them an easy training schedule or a really hard, difficult training schedule? Right? You'd obviously give them a hard, difficult one because it's
Mm,
very hard and difficult to make it to the NBA, right? And you even think of let's say if you go back to more of a like grassroots like youth sport, what happens to a lot of youth athletes is the athletes that are really good at a young age, they don't go through maybe many like performance blocks or performance challenges when they're younger, but then as they get older and things get hard, a lot of times they don't know how to handle these challenges versus an athlete who maybe has had to work for it longer and has been cut from teams and not had much playing time or not performed very well. Those athletes typically have already had to go through those challenges, so when they're older they have more of those mental skills to handle them too, right?
mm. Yeah, one of
So
the
it's
sort
helpful.
of thought experiments, one of the like thought experiments that I like is I remember someone was telling me if you wanted to like kind of engineer uh the toughest person in the world, the toughest kid in the world,
Right.
what would you put him through? You'd put him through some bullshit. So like I mean, obviously it's not like, the a perfect mindset, but it is, sometimes when I hear that, it like kind of reframes my perspective on my struggles. It helps me, reframe the way that I view
Yeah.
the challenges that I've gone through. Maybe this is just here to, you know, maybe I can use this or look at this as something that's a character builder, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Hey, it's like if you have hard goals, be prepared to do hard things. Like it's
Mm,
simple as that sometimes too, right?
yeah. So, talk about the stigma, especially for men, regarding mental health and psychology. Are people accepting of mental skills training, or is
Uh
it? Do you think it's something that people view as like kind of going against masculine norms, or is the stigma kind of going away? Curious to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, I think it's also important to distinguish between like mental health versus mental performance, right? So, um, I feel like there'd be more stigma more on the clinical side of things. So when people are very like really struggling with maybe like mental illness or clinical depression, generalized anxiety, like psychological disorders, versus more about on the other end of the spectrum where it's more about thriving, and it's like athletes learning how to perform under pressure, how to focus, how to have good, pregame preparation and confidence and things like that. Because I feel like if you were to ask just about any athlete, they'd probably say, yeah, the mental game's really important, right? Like when I often give workshops and for new groups, one of the first questions I ask them to get some discussion going is like, for let's say it's a hockey team, it's what percentage of hockey do you think is mental? We talk about it as a group, and the lowest answer I've ever got was 5%, and the highest answer I've gotten is 100, which it's not 100% mental, and but obviously it shows that people see the value. Um, the side
What
note. Oh,
sorry,
sorry,
go
go
ahead.
on. I was gonna say
Real
side
quick.
note. The funniest answer I've ever gotten was 17.5%. And I said this, I was like, I said this, I have to ask, how'd you come to that number? Like, he's like, well, 15 sounded too low and 20 sounded too high. So I had to meet in the middle. I'm like, okay, sure.
Great.
Sure. What was your question
Well,
though, Cooper? Sorry.
sorry, I was just gonna jump in and say, what percent do you think is mental?
Um, It's funny. So I actually don't have a percentage to give. Like I don't really think of it so much as a percentage. I think of it more like all athletes are different. So all athletes are going to have to rely on the mental game and to different extents, right? But when we talk about wanting to be your best and move on higher levels, like as you move up higher in levels, the differences in talent get smaller and smaller and smaller, meaning you have to find different ways to get better. And for the most part, everyone's working on their physical skills. Everyone's working on their technical skills. Everyone's working on tactical skills, but not everyone's working on their mental skills. So naturally, if you want to separate yourself from the pack, you should focus on something that not everyone else is doing, right? An extra advantage. But then at the same time, now it's also when you like after asking a group what percentage of, let's say, hockey do you think is mental, and the average answer in the room is 90%. It's like, well, if you think your game is 90% mental and you're not doing anything to deliberately train 90% of your game, imagine how much better you could get, how much room there is for growth. And then a lot of athletes are like, that's a good point, I never thought of it that way, which kind of opens it up. But yeah, but sorry, I guess that was a bit of a tangent. To answer your question from before though, I would say that there's an increasing acceptance of mental skills training in sport. I think it's becoming a lot more commonplace, and a lot of teams are bringing in mental performance coaches either with more of an integrated approach where they're there more often, or even just for workshops just to get discussions going and or team building. But yeah, I'd say there's a growing acceptance in hockey anyways. Like I can't speak to all sports, but yeah.
Interesting. Talk about tools for dealing with the risk aversion. I was, someone who was never. I struggled with, being comfortable with taking risks and doing
Mhm.
something that, if it goes well, would be huge. If it doesn't go well, then coach might get upset. I might get pulled out of the game. What are your thoughts in situations like that for athletes?
Um, hmm. So this is one of my favorite questions. So what would you define as a risky play in a basketball game, Cooper?
Step back three.
Step back three. Okay, so let's say it's a step back three. Okay. So when you think of that step back three, okay, in the moment, it might feel very risky, right? Very uncomfortable. Now, when you have the chance to do that step back three, what are the two options you have in that moment when you have an opportunity to do a step back three? What are the two
uh,
options?
I mean, it's it's hard to narrow it down to two, but it could be like, you hesitate and pass, or you actually shoot the ball.
Okay, so you either shoot the ball or you don't.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
So okay, so you either go for it or you don't. Okay. Now if you and this is under the assumption that a step back three is the right play to make, right? Like it makes sense to take a step back three, okay?
Mhm.
So you either take the shot or you don't. Now, if you take the shot, there are now two other possibilities, right? You either A, make the shot, or B, you don't make the shot. Okay. Now, if you go back to if you were to not choose to take a step back three, there's only one outcome. You don't make the shot. You give yourself no opportunity at upside, right? And if the step back three was the right play to make, it probably means that you also chose to do a play that didn't make sense. Maybe you hesitated, maybe you forced a pass, whatever it might be. And so when you think of it that way, what's really more risky? Taking the step back three and giving yourself a chance at scoring, or not taking that chance at all?
Mm,
What's more risky?
not taking the chance.
Right, not taking the chance. And so when we think about risk, we get to define what risk taking means on our own terms, right? Okay, so oftentimes athletes feel the discomfort of maybe like short-term risks of like, okay, like what if my teammates get upset with me? What if I miss? What if my coach gets upset? Whatever it might be. But they don't always think about the long-term risks of their short-term actions, right? Like, okay, like if you're never taking chances to make big shots, if you're never, taking chances to go through defenders and stick to your game and do the things you need to do to play well, then long term you're risking, maybe it's a college scholarship, maybe it's playing pro, getting noticed, moving on higher levels, whatever it might be, realizing full potential. And so the question really becomes, what's more risky? And oftentimes it's more risky to not commit to doing the uncomfortable things in the short term than to just do what's comfortable in the short term and then give yourself no long-term opportunity at success. So that's oftentimes a frame I'll give athletes, is like just kind of helping them understand, like, like maybe not going for it is actually more risky, right? Like that's a riskier path long term. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would definitely say that. I mean, just anecdotally, being viewed as someone who's not someone who's scared to make a tough decision and make a risky play. Even though in the short term your coach might get a little bit upset that you might have made a bad decision, or you made a risky play and it didn't pan out in the moment. In the long term, you start to mitigate the risk of them seeing you as someone who isn't willing to be a risk taker, because coaches respect that. Like, they know that, they're not going to be comfortable putting someone out there who's not willing to, make a tough decision and potentially risk making a mistake. Being a risk taker, coaches recognize when guys are, yeah, he made a stupid play, but I like the balls on this kid. Coaches have those thoughts. So I think when you're willing to take risks in the short term, maybe, you know, immediately the coach might be a little upset, or whoever it is might be a little bit upset, but you don't want to be viewed as somebody who's scared to make a play in the long term, because that's a greater risk, and coaches aren't comfortable putting those guys out.
And it also depends on your coach, right?
Yeah.
Like, I feel like quality coaching would understand the difference between like a broken play, like let's say you made the right decision but it just didn't work out, versus actually choosing and electing to do the wrong thing, right?
Mm,
Because just because a play doesn't work out doesn't mean it wasn't the right play to make, right? Like if you
yeah.
have, like, let's say a wide open 3-point opportunity and you miss, it doesn't mean you shouldn't take the next wide open three,
Yeah.
right? You should take that shot all day. So it's like, if you focus more on your actions and focus more on like just making the right choices regardless of how you feel, regardless of how comfortable it is, that's again when you can start to play a lot more consistently and to your potential. But if all you're doing is trying to avoid discomfort in the short term, you're really gonna be hurting yourself in the long term.
Yeah, and just to clean up my answer a little bit more, it's also, I guess I spent a lot of time talking about what other people might, how they might view the situation, but I feel like a good thing to do is maybe put more weight on what am I gonna think, like,
Yeah.
for just for now, forget what the coach is thinking about, forget what my teammates are thinking about, forget what my parents, friends, whatever. How am I gonna feel if I pass up a shot and I'm trying to go to sleep later at night? It's like
Mhm.
probably not too good. I'm not gonna feel very confident in myself. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I wouldn't. Yeah,
And
go ahead.
yeah. No, I was gonna say, like, your opinion needs to matter most of yourself, right? Like, we spend the most time with ourselves compared to everyone else, so we got to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves too. We can't just do it for other people, but at the same time, obviously, like, there naturally we do want to impress select other people, right? Like, you're going to care what your coach thinks, you're going to care what your, maybe your parents think, or what the scouts think, like that's okay. But it's more so like, how much time do you actually spend focusing on those things too, right? Versus like focusing on what you need to do to play well, which, as a nice little side reward will also, impress scouts, impress coaches, or likely impress scouts, likely impress coaches, etc.
Hmm. So I was curious to hear, do you feel yourself applying these principles that you talk with athletes about? Do you feel yourself applying them on a daily basis? Like, how neatly have these skills kind of carried over into your life outside of sport?
That's a good question. I think I think like let's take me as an entrepreneur, for example, right? So, when it comes to like, we talk about the squiggly line, right, of
Mhm.
progress. Like if Cooper, I'm not sure if you've went into entrepreneurship, if you aspire to, but there are a lot of ups and downs in entrepreneurship, and it's not always easy. It's not always easy, and there's always something that you need to do. And so I think that a lot of these things I talk to athletes about definitely go into my life. Like if we focus on entrepreneurship, like for example, like staying focused, like having clear intentions and goals, being willing to learn new skills, being willing to mess up, like all these things are really transferable into life. And so, and I'm not perfect. Like as a mental performance consultant, I have to remind myself of a lot of the things that I coach and I teach. But yeah, all the time, I'd say these principles I use in my own life, or try my best to, anyways.
Hmm. I'm also curious, do you see problems down the line for players who specialize too early? Talk about the differences between, as far as the pros and cons between multi-sport athletes and athletes who specialize.
Whew. Hmm. Okay, that's a loaded question. So y- you know, I I think it depends on the sport. Because for some sports, you need to specialize early and at a younger age. Like take gymnastics, for example. Now we think about for a lot of sports, being a multi-sport athlete can be really beneficial for different reasons, right? So, at a young age, typically, let's take basketball or hockey or something. Like you don't need to just play basketball or just play hockey, and it's one probably not the healthiest thing to do, but then also it's not going to help you be the best hockey or basketball player you can be,
Mhm.
right? So so I guess like if you think at a young age, if you're playing the same sport, all year round, it's all you do, you're likely to be more susceptible to like overuse injuries, more susceptible to burnout. So you might just hurt the love of your sport. You might become again too specialized. And like I'll give you an example for basketball too. Like you think about youth basketball at the youngest age, like you're probably going to just put the tallest kid at a young age in the number 5, right below the rim. Now the thing is like if that's all the kid ever plays, and then suddenly they get older, and next thing you know, they're not the tallest kid on their team, and maybe they're more suited to play like forward or guard. Now they didn't spend any time developing those other skills, and so now it hurts their long-term potential. So giving athletes a lot of different opportunities at a young age to develop different motor skills, to play different positions and play different sports, have fun, figure out what they like. Because if you don't try something, you don't know if you like it, right? So um, like those things are all really important. And I believe, like I'll take hockey for example. I'm pretty sure for high performance with hockey, it's typically best to not specialize until you're, I think, about 15 years old or so. And leading up to then, like you kind of like gradually cut down how many sports you play. But, at a young age, like kids should be playing as many different sports as they can. And that doesn't mean they have to be in recreational organized leagues or anything. It could just be unstructured play outside, right? Like road hockey or just like football at the local park or just like random games, like, whatever it might be. Right? Just giving kids an opportunity to play. Um, and yeah, but there's even this really good example too of early specialization versus multi-sport, where if you look at like Tiger Woods versus Roger Federer, like Tiger Woods specialized at a very, very young age, whereas Roger Federer, I believe like his mom like made him like just choose tennis because he was so passionate. He liked playing a lot of other sports. And so Roger Federer didn't specialize till much later versus Tiger Woods specialized really early. And you could argue both of them are the best at their sport of all time. And so the question becomes like, is, for in some cases, like you can be your best specializing early versus being multi-sport longer. But for the most part, I'd say multi-sport participation at a young age is best. It just gives kids an opportunity to figure out what they like, have fun, work different muscle groups, develop different skills. And then later on, if it gets to that point, you can learn to or you can focus on specializing.
So we've touched on this a bit, but I've got some friends making the transition between high school and college sports. What are some pieces of advice you would give to someone moving up the levels? How does the mental side of the game change as the level of competition rises?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the importance of the mental game would become more important, honestly, because, as we kind of spoke on earlier, like you said, the differences in talent get smaller and smaller and smaller as you go up in levels, meaning you have to find ways to, play a role really well, maybe, or to find ways to play consistent, have better feelings of maybe confidence, let's say, like where do you tie your confidence to? So I do think that the mental game becomes more important as you go higher in levels. One, just because the differences in talent get a lot smaller, but when you think about a lot of athletes who move on from, let's say, high school to college sport, a lot of them were probably one of, if not some of the best players on their team. And so you go from that status to maybe being redshirted your first year or barely playing. And so having that understanding of what your role is and what you need to do to play it really, really well, and having that acceptance is something that I see hurt a lot of players when they move up in a higher level, but then also the ones who can really accept the roles and have good habits and understand where they're at. That can also help them build trust with coaches. When they first get there, show that they have good habits, they're willing to do what it takes to win, be a team player. And then longer term, whenever you have that opportunity to step into a bigger role, you're ready to shine. Yeah, I'd say, I'd say just one of the challenges for sure is just athletes, like they have to take on different roles, and not everyone's down for that, right? But if you want to, it's kind of one of those things that for some athletes you have to do in the short term to get something long term that you want.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on mindfulness. What have your experiences been related to mindfulness and meditation?
Right. So Cooper, I can't help but think about when me and you first connected, this actually had to do with a mindfulness project for school.
Oh, right.
Right.
Yes.
So it's funny. It kind of comes full circle, right? And so mindfulness, I think there's a lot of misconceptions around what mindfulness is and how it's used. So, for many people, when they think of mindfulness, they think of people like sitting down and getting into their Zen and whatever it might be. And sure, that may be what mindfulness looks like sometimes, but mindfulness really is about just being very, very focused and in tune with what you're doing in this very moment in a non-judgmental way. There's a great quote from John Kabat-Zinn where he explains mindfulness in a much more concrete way. I know your first guest, Joe Carbone, he knows it like the back of his hand. So if he was here, I know he would tell me exactly what it is. So shout out to Joe if you're listening. but really, when I think of mindfulness, I just think of it as, training your attention, training your ability to focus and recognize thoughts. So if we were to go back to something we touched on earlier, where we were talking about like noticing you're feeling maybe nervous or worried or frightened, whatever it might be, mindfulness helps you recognize that feeling and create that distance from it. So then that way you can refocus on to whatever you need to do in this moment. And so to me, mindfulness can be one of the greatest performance enhancers out there. Because really it's about being able to train your attention and redirect it onto what matters in this moment. And if you were to ask many athletes, like, hey, like how often could you use the ability to redirect your focus onto what you can control or onto your next shift or onto the next play, they'd probably be like, I could really use that. Okay, well, a lot of it has to do with mindfulness, right? But Cooper, I'm curious though, like over the years, because it's clear you took an interest in mindfulness when you had that project. Like what are some things that maybe you've learned about mindfulness?
I mean, I don't know if you want to go here, man. How much time do you have? Uh,
Give me the Coles notes. The Coles notes.
yeah. So I would say that, well, firstly, the reason that I love it so much now is because I can just, yes, there are tons of benefits of it that, like, a lot of people talk about. There's well supported, uh, the benefits are well supported by the literature and by the research. But the thing
Right.
that I love most about it is just the intrinsic value of devoting some time to just be in the moment. Like, it's just so nice,
Yeah.
especially when I'm really busy. I have stuff to do all day, projects, academic work, working out. To just, it's so nice to just, take anywhere from 5 minutes to even an hour sometimes to just sit and be in the moment. Just,
Yeah.
be in the now, and obviously, my thoughts will wander. I won't be present for the entire time, but it's just nice to, make my objective the sole, you know, uh, make the objective of the task to just, be here now, and
Yeah.
there's no other goal. And also, it's nice because it's one of the only times during the day where I'm not really changing anything. If
Mm.
I'm working out, I'm trying to lift a weight. If I'm playing basketball, I'm trying to make a shot. When I'm meditating, I'm just trying to. The only objective is to kind of have no objective. You're sort of just,
Mm.
you're noticing everything that's happening, and then you might redirect your attention. But other than that, you're it's more of a noticing and accepting as opposed to manipulating, which is really
Yeah.
nice. But in terms of the
Mm.
benefits, I mean, even going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, which is accepting that you might be nervous, but or anxious or scared, but it doesn't need to change the way that you play. I mean, that idea can kind of be derived from ideas related to mindfulness, because when you're meditating, you're again, you're not really trying to change the way you feel. You're just trying to acknowledge and accept it.
Yeah.
And then, regardless of, whether you're feeling anxious or whether you're feeling scared or sad or happy or joyful, you just notice those feelings as appearances in consciousness. And then
Hmm.
bring your attention back to the breath or sounds or sights or whatever it may be.
Hmm.
Um, so there's a pretty clear connection, because, for me, my whole attitude towards performance is, you can feel whatever you want as long as it doesn't change your actions. And when you meditate or practice mindfulness, you're kind of taking the first step, which is just acknowledge how you feel, but
Hmm.
you continue to, remain attentive to what's going on in your environment. uh, so yeah, I mean, it's tremendously valuable. And there are definitely unexpected ways that it's helped. Like, I feel more present even when I'm just talking to people. I feel like I'm a better listener just because
Yeah.
I'm less focused on the next thing that I'm going to say, the last thing that I said. I'm better at just, you know, accepting accepting the kind of uh flaws that emerge in conversation, and just, bring myself back to the present. Or
Right.
in classes, obviously in sports, it was very helpful. But yeah, I mean, overall, it's just the skill of being in the moment, is something that you can apply to pretty much anything, to answer
Yeah,
your question.
absolutely. Like like you think about even just our conversation right now, like just being very present and engaged in our conversation, and like in this moment, like this is the most important thing, because this, like, right now in this moment, it's the only thing that really exists is right here right now, right? And so, but like, it's funny, Cooper, though, like I think when I first started learning more about mindfulness, I had on my podcast, I had Dr. Tim Herzog on, and we were talking about like confidence, and he brought up this book called The Confidence Gap. Have you read that book, by the way?
I've not.
You should. You totally should. You really enjoy it. Where it talks about the idea of acceptance and commitment therapy or training, um and so from there, like, it really opened my eyes into mindfulness and the powers. And I remember during it would have been during the initial lockdowns of here in Canada with COVID. So let's say early to mid 2020. Um, I remember I started to take up mindfulness because everyone had so much more time on their hands, right? So I was like, okay, I'll do this. Um, and so I remember doing using the Headspace app and learning about mindfulness, and I remember like it was like it was so eye opening to me about like how poor my attention span was, because until you actually sit down and try to focus on something as boring as your breathing, for example, you begin to realize like, my mind really wanders, or I really get distracted, or like how many times you really have to refocus. But I realized like as I kept doing it, it's just like any other skill where you need reps, and every time you redirect your attention, that's a rep, um, and then over time you just see the benefits in just everyday life or work, or when something negative happens, like you don't react so quickly. You can kind of give yourself some space to respond. And um, but yeah, like I couldn't help but notice when I said that you had a smirk on your face. Like what were your first early impressions of mindfulness training, Cooper? Did you notice like how easily you were distracted?
Yeah, I mean, I
It's
still, I mean,
crazy.
the smirk is because it's not something that I've gotten rid of. I still
Oh,
think that
same.
the vast majority of
Mhm.
the time when I'm trying to practice mindfulness, my mind is somewhere else. But
Oh yeah,
I
same.
mean, you ultimately, I guess, develop an attitude towards those thoughts of acceptance and understanding that this is just what the mind does, and
Yeah.
you just have to notice that, and kind of uh, I guess, awaken from the spell of thought, so to speak, and you just notice
Mhm.
that your mind has been wandering, and then you bring
Yeah.
yourself back and do it again and again, repeat that cycle again and again and again and again and again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And they're all reps, right? Like, and I think that's something important to keep in mind too, is it's not like once you have a set number of, headspace sessions or mindfulness sessions, you just suddenly, you're totally non-judgmental of your feelings and thoughts. You can just focus whenever you want and you don't get distracted. No, it's like mindfulness is not about reaching a goal. It's more about striving towards values. It's about creating more awareness. It's kind of like a lifelong thing. And obviously, like anything that can be learned can also be unlearned. So it's important to keep up with it, and to make sure you're training your mindfulness, even though you may not be feeling anxious. Right? It's just a way to keep up that skill.
Yeah.
Right? So
So my last question was, do you think if something, so do you think that if you believe something is going to happen, it's more likely to happen, or do you think it's irrelevant?
I think if you do the things required to make something happen, then it's more likely to happen, regardless of if you believe in it or not, because
Mm.
without the actions it's just a thought. So um you know like if I sat here and believe that, let's say, believe that I could make $1 million, in the next year, let's say, but I did nothing required to help me work towards that, then the belief isn't really helpful, right? It doesn't really get you anywhere. Now, if that belief helps empower you and motivate you to take those actions, so then that way you can earn $1 million in the next year, then yes, like believing in it can help you. But without the action, it's just a thought. The action is
Yeah.
where the power is. What do you think, Cooper?
I mean, I agree. It's just the reason that I ask is because a lot of I'm thinking of people in the basketball community who are like who like to shoot. They'll often say like, yeah, I mean, I whenever you shoot, you should think that it's going in, and I always wonder like, is that really true, or like, what does your belief in an outcome actually influence the outcome?
Hmm. Well, I'm maybe I don't know. I mean, if you think about it, it's like if every time you shoot the ball and you're like, okay, this is going to go in, then does that also mean that your focus is in the future and not in the moment, in terms of like what do you actually have to do to take a quality shot, right?
Yeah.
So if all you're thinking is like, hey, like I want this to go in, or I don't want to miss, or whatever it might be, it's like, well, obviously you want to go in, and obviously you don't want to miss, right? No one shoots to miss on purpose. I like to think not anyways, right? So um and so I mean, it's like, okay, yeah, like just focus on what you want got to do right now to take a quality shot, and if it goes in, that's great. If it doesn't, then that doesn't mean you should change the way you're shooting the ball. But as long as you're doing the right things, regardless of if you believe in it or not, and believe in yourself or not, then like that's what's going to help drive you closer to where you want to be. Kind of going back to the whole thing about how feeling good can be overrated sometimes.
Yeah. All right. I think that will suffice for an episode.
Cool.